Hello, dear friends. Nice to meet you again. Today, I bring you another meaningful story that I am sure you will enjoy. Listen to me, prepare yourself a cup of tea and a comfortable sofa to start exploring the story right now. Here we go. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the flat, open fields of the small Midwest town in hues of amber and violet. At the end of a dusty road sat the Harper family home, its faded paint and weathered windows bearing the marks of years gone by. Inside, Emily Harper, a slender 20-year-old with weary eyes and roughened hands, was hunched over the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of overdue bills. The sound of her mother's coughing echoed from the adjoining room, a grim melody that had become part of their lives. "Emily," her mother called weakly, "could you bring me some water?" Emily leapt to her feet, filling a glass from the tap before rushing to her mother's bedside. Her mother, frail and pale, managed a faint smile. "You need to rest, Mom. Don't worry. I'll figure everything out," Emily said softly, though the weight of her words felt almost unbearable. A sudden noise outside broke their moment, a car pulling up. Emily glanced out the window and froze. A sleek black sedan rolled to a halt in front of their home, a sharp contrast to the old pickup trucks that usually lined the neighborhood. "Who could that be?" her mother asked, her voice laced with unease. Before Emily could respond, the car door opened, and out stepped a man in an impeccably tailored suit. His name was Robert Sinclair. Robert's silver hair gleamed under the fading sunlight as he approached with a calm, deliberate stride. His aura exuded authority and precision. Emily stepped outside, her brows furrowed. "Miss Harper," he began, his voice deep and measured, "I understand your family is in a difficult situation." Emily blinked, her confusion evident. "Excuse me? Who are you?" "My name is Robert Sinclair. I'm a businessman with interests in this region," he replied, gesturing to his car. "I've come with an offer." Emily crossed her arms. "What kind of offer?" Robert's gaze held steady. "I want you to marry me." The world seemed to stop. "Marry you?" Emily asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I am," Robert said plainly. "You're intelligent, capable, and determined. In return, I'll guarantee your family's financial stability. Your mother will receive top-notch medical care, and your younger brother's education will be fully funded. It's a fair arrangement." Emily's mind raced. I need time to think," she managed. "Of course," Robert replied, "but I'll need your answer soon. Time is a luxury neither of us can afford." He returned to his car and drove away, leaving Emily standing on the porch, her thoughts a whirlwind. That night, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows across her face. Her mother's voice broke the silence. "Emily," she called from the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. "Who was that man?" Emily hesitated before explaining Robert's proposal. Her mother's eyes widened in shock. "That's absurd," she exclaimed before a bout of coughing forced her to sit. Emily knelt beside her. "Listen, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "If I do this, you'll get the care you need. Daniel won't have to drop out of school. Maybe this is our only chance." Tears welled in her mother's eyes. "I don't want you to sacrifice your happiness for us," she whispered. "I'm not happy now," Emily replied bitterly, "but at least this way, I can help." Her mother fell silent, anguish written on her face. The wedding day arrived with a clear but cold morning. Emily stood before a small mirror in a borrowed gown, the lace irritating her skin. She adjusted her veil with trembling hands, staring at her reflection. "Am I making the biggest mistake of my life?" she whispered. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was her brother, Daniel, dressed in an ill-fitting suit. "It's time," he said, his voice cracking. Emily forced a smile and nodded. Let's go." The ceremony was simple and quick. Shortly after, Emily found herself in the back seat of a black car, driving toward a sprawling estate. The Sinclair mansion loomed atop a secluded hill, its grandeur shadowed by an air of coldness. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers inside were impressive but lacked warmth. Mary, the long-serving housekeeper, greeted Emily with a formal smile and showed her to a modest room on the second floor. "This will be your room, Mrs. Sinclair," Mary said, her tone neutral. "Thank you," Emily replied, forcing a polite smile. "Please call me Emily." Mary nodded slightly before leaving, her expression unreadable. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at her new life, uncertainty settling heavily in her chest. Over the next few days, Emily struggled to adjust to her new life. The mansion's vastness and eerie silence were unsettling. Robert, now her husband, was either locked away in his study or gone for hours. Their interactions were polite but distant, their marriage feeling more like a contract than a partnership. One evening, Emily gathered the courage to join him for dinner. The enormous dining table felt absurdly empty with just the two of them seated at opposite ends. "Do you always eat alone?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Mostly," Robert replied without looking up. "I have a lot of work to attend to." Emily pressed on. "And what kind of work keeps you out so late?" Robert's fork paused midair. His sharp gaze met hers, cold and unreadable. "Business," he said curtly before returning to his meal. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling. As the hours dragged on, a faint creaking sound broke the silence. At first, it was soft, like distant footsteps, but it grew louder, as though someone was walking down the hallway outside her room. She sat up, heart pounding, and slid out of bed. Opening her door just a crack, she peeked out into the dimly lit hallway. It was empty, bathed in pale moonlight. The sound had stopped. The next day, determined to shake the unease, Emily began exploring the mansion. She wandered through opulent rooms, each more lavish than the last, but most were empty or locked. In the West Wing, she came upon a door that stood out. Heavily reinforced with a brass handle and no visible keyhole, it radiated an air of secrecy. As she reached for the handle, a chill ran down her spine. Just then, Mary's voice startled her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the housekeeper said sharply. Emily spun around, her hand dropping to her side. "Why is this door locked?" "It's the master's orders," Mary replied, her expression grave. "You'd best leave it alone." Emily frowned. "What's inside?" "That's not for you to know," Mary said firmly. "Let it be." That evening, Emily tried to push the strange encounter from her mind, but the unease lingered. The mansion seemed to hum with unspoken secrets. Late that night, the sound of a car engine caught her attention. She peered out her window and saw Robert stepping into a sleek black sedan parked in the driveway. A tall man in a trench coat stood nearby, speaking to him in hushed tones. Unable to resist, Emily slipped on her coat and crept down the grand staircase, keeping to the shadows. From a distance, she watched the two men through the large front windows. "Make sure she doesn't find out," Robert said sharply, his voice carrying a tone of command. Emily's breath caught. Were they talking about her? What was he hiding? The mansion was eerily silent as Emily crept back to the West Wing. She had been watching the locked door for days, waiting for the right moment. Tonight, inexplicably, it was unlocked. Her heart thundered as she stepped inside. The faint creak of the door echoed in the dark corridor. The room was dimly lit by a single dusty chandelier. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old books, documents, and framed photographs. At the center of the room was a large mahogany desk, stacked with yellowed papers and an ornate fountain pen. Emily hesitated before approaching the desk, her eyes scanning for clues about Robert's mysterious behavior. She picked up a photo. It showed Robert standing beside a radiant young woman, smiling stiffly. Flipping the photo over, she found a date and name written in elegant handwriting. Robert and Evelyn, 1998. Her hands trembled as she picked up another photo, and then another. Each depicted Robert with a different woman. The dates spanned decades, and the names were always different. Beside the photos were legal documents, marriage certificates, prenuptial agreements, and death certificates. Emily's breath hitched as she read the causes of death, accidents, illnesses, sudden disappearances. They all ended the same way. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Among the papers, she noticed a leather-bound journal. Flipping it open, she found pages filled with Robert's meticulous handwriting. The journal's entries chronicled Robert's relationships with various women, starting with how he charmed them and gained their trust. But as Emily read further, the tone darkened. Each entry detailed how he isolated, controlled, and eventually discarded them. A chilling sentence made Emily's blood run cold. They always think they can leave. They don't realize they're mine until it's too late. A sudden noise outside the door jolted her. She quickly stuffed the journal into her bag and looked around for a hiding spot. But before she could move, the door swung open. Robert stood in the doorway, his expression a mask of cold fury. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Emily clutched her bag tightly, forcing herself to stay calm. I got lost. I didn't mean to intrude." Robert stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. His sharp eyes bore into hers. "This room is off limits," he said, his tone like ice. "I made that very clear." Emily swallowed hard. "I just wanted to understand why so many rooms are locked, why you never talk about your past." "You don't need to understand," Robert snapped. "You only need to follow the rules." Trembling, Emily gathered her courage. "What happened to them, Robert? Your previous wives, where are they? Why is there no trace of them after they married you?" Robert's jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked as if he might answer, but then his cold mask returned. "That's none of your concern. Drop this, Emily, for your own good." But she pressed on, her voice firm despite the fear. "I deserve to know the truth. Am I just another one of your projects? Someone you'll discard when you're done?" For a brief moment, Robert's face softened, as though he might explain. But his tone was colder than ever when he spoke again. "You're my wife now. That's all that matters. Don't make me regret my generosity." Emily's chest tightened as she realized the danger she was truly in. Robert wasn't just a man with secrets, he was a predator. "I'm sorry," she murmured, lowering her eyes. "I shouldn't have pried." Robert studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Good. Now get out of here, and stay out." Back in her bedroom, Emily locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the journal from her back. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Each entry revealed more of Robert's sinister behavior, his manipulation, the lies, and the cover-ups. One phrase, written in bold letters across an entire page, stood out. "They think they can escape, but they never do." Emily's heart pounded as she realized she had to leave. But the mansion was a fortress, surrounded by high walls and watched by security cameras. The staff appeared loyal to Robert, and he was always watching her. A knock on the door startled her. She quickly shoved the journal under her pillow. "Mrs. Sinclair?" Mary's voice called softly. "Are you all right?" Emily cleared her throat, trying to sound calm. "Yes, I'm fine." Mary lingered for a moment before her footsteps retreated. Emily waited until the house fell silent before pulling out the journal again. As she read, she began forming a plan. But her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They stopped just outside her door. "Emily," Robert's voice called, low and menacing. "Are you awake?" She froze, holding her breath. The doorknob rattled but didn't turn. After a long pause, the footsteps retreated. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as the full weight of her situation sank in. She was trapped in a house with a man who had no intention of letting her go. Clutching the journal to her chest, she whispered, "I'll get out of here, no matter what it takes." The tension in the mansion grew with each passing day. Desperate for support, Emily confided in Mary, the housekeeper whose quiet kindness was her only source of comfort. One afternoon, as Emily dried dishes in the cavernous kitchen, she leaned closer to Mary and whispered, "Something isn't right here. I found things in that locked room. I don't think I'm safe." Mary froze, her expression grim. She glanced around to ensure they were alone. "I've worked for Mr. Sinclair for over 20 years, she said quietly. "I've seen things I can't explain, things I wish I hadn't seen." Emily's eyes widened. "Then why stay? Why not leave?" "You don't understand," Mary said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He has ways of keeping people silent. Staff who've asked too many questions have disappeared. But you're different, Emily. You're his wife. If anyone can get out, it's you." Emily's heart raced. "Then help me, please." Mary hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I'll do what I can." Emily began observing Robert's habits with meticulous care. She noted the timing of his late-night outings, memorized the rotation of the security cameras, and studied the schedules of the guards. During the day, she maintained the facade of the perfect wife. At breakfast, she served Robert coffee with a polite smile, complimented his sharp suits, and feigned interest in his stories about business. Each interaction felt like a betrayal of her true self, but she knew it was the only way to buy time. One evening, under the guise of familiarizing herself with the mansion, Emily wandered into the basement. The door was slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued. She slipped inside. The air was damp, heavy with the faint smell of mildew. Using her phone's light, she descended the creaky wooden stairs, her footsteps echoing softly. Rows of old wine barrels and dusty storage crates lined the room, but one section of the wall seemed different. It had a seam, barely visible in the dim light, as though concealing something. Tentatively, Emily pressed against it, and to her astonishment, the wall swung open with a low groan, revealing a dark passageway. That night, Emily lay in bed, her mind racing. The secret passage felt like a lifeline, but she knew she couldn't act impulsively. She needed proof of Robert's crimes to protect herself once she escaped. Her resolve hardened when she overheard Robert's late-night phone call. Standing just outside his study, she caught fragments of his deep voice through the slightly ajar door. "Transfer everything before she gets suspicious," Robert said, his tone sharp and urgent. "Time is running out." Emily's blood ran cold. Was he talking about her? What was he planning to take? Or worse? The next morning, Mary approached Emily in the garden. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I have something to show you." In Mary's room, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, were old letters and documents. The truth was more horrifying than Emily had imagined. Robert was directly tied to the disappearances of his previous wives. "They all tried to leave," Mary said, tears brimming in her eyes. "None of them made it." Emily's heart raced. "Then help me," she pleaded. Mary hesitated before nodding. "We'll wait until he leaves for one of his meetings. I'll create a distraction for the guards while you use the passageway to escape." Emily gripped Mary's hands tightly. "Thank you. I'll leave the journal with the police. They need to know the truth." "Promise me you'll get out," Mary whispered, her voice trembling. "I promise," Emily said, her determination outweighing her fear. The night arrived. Over dinner, Robert kissed Emily's hand, his cold smile making her shiver. "Don't wait up for me," he said, his tone dripping with false affection. As soon as Robert left, Emily and Mary sprang into action. Mary staged a loud argument with a guard near the front gate, drawing attention away from the security cameras. Emily slipped into the basement, clutching the journal and a small bag of essentials. She pressed into the hidden passageway, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The tunnel was narrow and damp, its walls cold and unforgiving. Her flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows as she moved quickly. Each step felt like a gamble, the fear of discovery pressing down on her like a weight. Suddenly, a noise echoed behind her. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. "Emily, you can't run from me," Robert's voice boomed, cold and menacing. Her pulse thundered. She turned off her flashlight, pressing herself against the wall, straining to hear. The footsteps grew louder. "I have to keep moving," she whispered to herself, clutching the journal tightly. Emily quickened her pace, her breath shallow. The voices behind her grew louder, accompanied by the heavy sound of boots on stone. "Find her," Robert barked, his tone sharp with fury. Emily reached the tunnel's end, a rusted metal door. She pushed it open, the creak echoing like a scream through the passageway. She slipped through, emerging into a dense forest. The night was pitch black, lit only by the faint glow of the moon. Emily ran, branches scraping her arms and face. Behind her, flashlights bobbed in the darkness as Robert's men spread out, their shouts growing closer. "She can't have gone far," one of them yelled. Emily's lungs burned, but she forced herself to keep going. The journal was her only weapon, her only proof against Robert. Just as her strength began to wane, she saw it. A narrow dirt road at the edge of the woods. Summoning her last reserves of energy, she sprinted toward it, the sound of Robert's men closing in. Through the trees, Emily spotted the glare of headlights on a nearby road. Summoning her last reserves of energy, she stumbled toward them, waving her arms desperately. "Help! Please, stop!" she cried. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, a man in his early 30s with sharp eyes and a sense of urgency, jumped out. "Are you Emily?" he asked, his voice taut with determination. "Yes," she gasped. "How do you know me?" "I'm James Reynolds, an investigative journalist," he explained quickly. "I've been tracking Robert Sinclair for years. Get in. We don't have much time." Without hesitation, Emily climbed into the car, clutching the journal to her chest. As James hit the gas, Robert's men burst from the woods, a black SUV roaring onto the road in pursuit. "Hold on," James said, swerving to dodge a fallen branch. Emily glanced back, her heart pounding as the SUV gained on them. "They won't stop," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll do whatever it takes to bring me back." James's jaw tightened. "Not if we can get this to the authorities first." Suddenly, the SUV pulled alongside them. The passenger window rolled down, and a man leaned out with a crowbar, aiming for the side mirror. "Get down," James shouted. Emily ducked just as the mirror shattered with a violent crash. James swerved sharply, sending the SUV careening off the road into a ditch. The forest thinned as they sped toward the city. Emily's hands shook as she opened the journal, flipping through its damning pages. "This is everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Names, dates, and even the methods he used to silence his victims. "It's all here." James nodded, his gaze fixed on the road. "With this and the evidence I've gathered, we can finally bring him down. But we have to move fast. He won't give up easily." As they neared the outskirts of the city, Emily's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number lit up the screen. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Her blood ran cold. She showed the message to James, who gripped the wheel tighter. "He's desperate," James said grimly. "That makes him dangerous. But don't worry, we have the truth on our side." Emily nodded, a flicker of resolve returning to her eyes. "Then let's finish this." The day Robert Sinclair was brought to justice was one Emily would never forget. Standing beside James in the crowded courtroom, she watched as the judge listed Robert's crimes: fraud, coercion, and suspected involvement in multiple disappearances. Emily clutched the journal tightly, its evidence central to the case. The weight of her journey bore down on her, but for the first time in months, she felt lighter. Justice had prevailed. The media exploded with news of Robert's arrest. Headlines exposed him as a predator who had built his empire on lies and manipulation. Families of his victims came forward, thanking Emily and James for their courage in uncovering the truth. As part of a court settlement, Robert's estate was liquidated to fund a compensation program for his victims. Emily, one of the primary claimants, used her share to pay off her mother's medical debts and ensure her younger brother could finish college. Their relief was more valuable to her than any amount of money. Back in her hometown, Emily began rebuilding her life. With James's encouragement, she opened a community center to support women in crisis. She called it New Beginnings, a tribute to her own journey of survival and renewal. The center quickly became a refuge for those in need. Emily shared her story openly, inspiring women to trust their instincts and take control of their lives. "Your past doesn't define you," she would tell them. "Your courage to change does." As Emily dedicated herself to helping others, her bond with James deepened. What began as a partnership in seeking justice grew into something more. Late-night strategy sessions gave way to dinners filled with laughter, shared dreams, and unspoken feelings. One year after their harrowing escape, James took Emily to a quiet park just outside her hometown, the very place where he had first picked her up that fateful night. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft golds and pinks, James led her to a bench overlooking a serene lake. With a nervous smile, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and knelt. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "you've shown me what true courage looks like. You've taught me that even the most broken paths can lead to something beautiful. Will you let me walk beside you forever?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She smiled, her voice steady as she replied, "Yes, but no locked doors in our life." James laughed softly, sliding the elegant ring onto her finger. As they embraced, the sun set behind them, casting a warm glow over the lake, a perfect beginning to their new chapter. Their wedding was a modest but deeply meaningful celebration held in Emily's hometown, the community that had stood by her through her darkest times. Friends, neighbors, and the women whose lives Emily had touched gathered to celebrate her new beginning. The ceremony took place in the Garden of New Beginnings, surrounded by blooming flowers and an atmosphere of hope. Emily wore a simple white dress, her smile radiant as she and James exchanged vows. The love and joy in the air were palpable, and not a single eye in the crowd was dry. In her speech, Emily reflected on her journey. "Sometimes, life takes you through darkness to show you the value of light," she said, her voice steady with emotion. "I wouldn't be here today without the people who believed in me, who stood by me when I had no strength left. For that, I am forever grateful. This isn't just the end of a chapter, it's the beginning of a whole new story." As they danced beneath strings of twinkling lights, James leaned in and whispered, "You didn't just survive, Emily. You thrived. I'm so proud to be part of your story." Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I'm grateful you were there to help me write it. Thank you for joining us on Emily's incredible journey, a story of resilience, justice, and the transformative power of love." From a life of fear and uncertainty, Emily found her purpose and reclaimed her joy, showing us all that courage and determination can light the way through the darkest times. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who might find inspiration in Emily's strength. And remember, this is just one of many soul-stirring tales we bring to you. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a heartfelt journey that uplifts and reminds you of the beauty of the human spirit. Take care, stay strong, and always believe in new beginnings. Goodbye and see you in the next story.